On this week's show, I have Lisa Donovan and Julie Belcher of Rêverie Retreats. These retreats are the kind of trips that I want to take. Travel to the Loire Valley, take a French pastry lesson with an acclaimed baker, have a natural wine tasting, plenty of time to eat and relax, maybe make some new friends. You're going to learn how and why Julie and Lisa started this, and how you can join them on one of these excursions. This is Chris, and you're listening to Chefs Without Restaurants, the show where I speak with culinary entrepreneurs and people working in the food and beverage industry outside of a traditional restaurant setting. If you're a longtime listener or have maybe explored the archives, you might have heard my conversation with Lisa Donovan a couple years ago. We talked about her pastry background, and at the time she had just released her memoir, Our Lady of Perpetual Hunger. But now she has something completely new cooking. With partner Julie Belcher, they're leading what I think are some of the most fun-sounding culinary retreats. Their upcoming trips include the French Riviera and, as I'd mentioned earlier, the Loire Valley. We talk about how they select the partners and purveyors they work with, natural wine, and not wanting to work in a professional restaurant kitchen. I also wanted to discuss their dynamic and what their working relationship looks like, how they balance their tasks and workflow. And just because, I had to talk to Lisa about pie crust. If this sounds like it's up your alley, stick around. And you've probably heard it from me a million times, but if you love this show, please share it. More listeners means the opportunity to have more guests and the guests that you want to hear. By the way, who do you want to hear on the show anyway? Let me know. DM me on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants or email me at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. And I try not to be too focused on being a numbers guy or huge milestones, but this is episode 199. Next episode is going to be the big 200. And I'm really excited for that. I went through the list of all the people I could reach out to and thought about who I wanted to have on the show. But I'm actually having my friend Justin Khanna back on the show. Justin and I did a long conversation a couple years back on this show. I broke it up into 2 episodes. I recently recorded the episode. I think it's going to provide a lot of value. I hope it's fun to listen to. So keep a lookout for that. That's going to be episode 200 coming up really soon. Hopefully next week. And this week's show will be coming right up after a word from this week's sponsor, the United States Personal Chef Association and Hire a Chef. Are you a personal chef looking for support and growth opportunities? Look no further than the United States Personal Chef Association. With nearly 1,000 members across the U.S. and Canada, USPCA provides liability insurance, certification, lead generation, and more. Consumers can trust that their meal experience is insured and supported by USPCA. And now, for a limited time, save $75 on new membership and get your premier listing on Hire a Chef by using the code TAXBREAK2023 at USPCA.com. That's capital T, capital B. Plus, if you have products or services to sell chefs and their clients, showcase your business on Hire a Chef and USPCA websites with our great introductory packages. To learn more about membership, advertising, or partnership opportunities, call Angela at 1-800-995-2138, extension 705, or email apratagr@uspca.com. Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the show today.
Hi. Thanks for having us. Thank you.
I'm excited to have you. Lisa, good to see you, have you back. I guess it was like 2 years ago that you were first on the show.
Yeah.
So we're going to catch up, and you're doing something completely different. Last time you were here to talk about your book and your pastry history, but now you have a really cool endeavor. And Julie, so nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Great to meet you.
I don't want to spend too much time on your backgrounds. For our listeners, Lisa was on the show maybe 2 years ago, and I'm going to link that show in the show notes. I would just call her pastry chef extraordinaire and author. So we will start there. Julie, can you give a little background on who you are, what you do as it relates to the food world for a little context?
Sure. About 10 years ago, I was working in a coffee shop and kind of became obsessed with pastry stuff at home, which is actually how I met Lisa via a friend of ours and started working in some restaurant kitchens, kind of as a stagiaire to a couple of pastry chefs, including Lisa, eventually, sort of, or an assistant. And pretty quickly learned that I did not want to work in a restaurant kitchen. It wasn't for me, but I did really love the idea of working in a bakery. And so a few months after sort of starting in kitchens, I went to France for a while to learn how to bake from a baker named Richard Rouen in the Loire Valley. And I worked with him for a few months and then came back and had plans to open a bakery that didn't work out. Went back to France and ended up playing music there professionally for about 5 years, and then also working at Richard's Bakery. So kind of had a roundabout relationship with professional food and kitchen and bakery world. But after living in France, I came back and started teaching baking classes in Nashville. So that was how I stayed connected and ended up selling bread during COVID. So we kind of have had a bit of a wild ride in the food world.
That's really cool. I've never even been to France. It's on my list, and maybe I'll have to join one of your trips sometime. I wouldn't even know where to start going to France, so it's on the bucket list. And music, you were a musician for a number of years. It's quite a divergent path.
It very much was. I've played music my whole life. Played piano growing up, and I was in France kind of thinking of doing some R&D for opening a bakery here. And I was on a vacation, and some friends of mine connected me to a musician there, and eventually ended up moving there to play with that person. I was playing kids music originally, which was awesome. That's like the ticket in the music world.
Doing kids music?
Yeah, you don't go to bed late.
I've heard that. Do you know the presidents of the United States of America who did the song Peaches and all that? Did you know that he's like a kids musician now? I heard him on a podcast. He decided he was over touring the country and not being around his family. I think his name's like Casper Baby Pants or something. And he decided he wasn't going to tour. He lives in Seattle and he just wants to do like kids shows. He said, I want to be home in bed with my wife every night and spend time with my kids. And I'm just going to jam and play like music for kids. And it's been a super lucrative career compared to being like an alt rocker, you know? So weird. Who knew?
Swallow your pride, and then you have the best music career ever. I mean, think about Raffi. He's like a national treasure. So
what's the equivalent of that as a chef? Because I tried doing cooking classes for kids, and that was not my jam at all.
I tried that a couple of times as well. It can be fun. You have to be very comfortable with mess and a loss of like instruction.
Yes. Well, and I think just cooking instruction is something that it's its own thing. And, you know, that's something I want to talk to you about because that is part of what you're doing now. I mean, I love cooking. I love teaching people how to cook in the context of like working in a kitchen, teaching other professionals, but I've never really been drawn to like having a kitchen where people come and teach them how to cook. But I know both of you do that. But before we get into that, let's just jump in. What is this new exciting business that the two of you have started together?
Go ahead.
We started Rêverie, which is
well, so I was doing a lot of going back to sort of the workshopping and the classes. I was doing a lot of that after I left restaurants. And, you know, something Julie and I had in common is that me much later, you know, is about 15 years into my career, when I decided I didn't want to work in restaurant kitchens anymore. But that was sort of a pivotal point for both of us. And I started doing a lot of workshopping around the country and teaching classes around the country and doing private events and doing a lot of things that were, you know, in private homes or with artists like Emily Leonard. I would travel with them. I did a couple of retreats with her, and then also was doing some with my friend who's a yoga instructor. We went to Costa Rica, and then we had talked about doing some things around here in Nashville. So this model of like finding a way to connect with people in the kitchen versus, you know, sort of having this high profile career where I don't ever actually get to see people engage with the food. That was not interesting to me at all. And I really wanted to, I don't think I ever really had designs to be a teacher necessarily, but what was interesting to me that was also interesting to Julie was sort of the having those moments of like connectivity with people over food beyond just sitting down to a meal with them, which was sort of always my impulse, was like getting people to a table, making them share food, really, having this experience, which is what Buttermilk Road was, of sitting with strangers in your hometown and sharing a meal and imbibing and having an experience that you would normally only have with, your closest friends. That idea sort of moved into like a kitchen was really appealing to me because a couple of things had happened, I think, in the restaurant world and to me just personally, was I started to feel really disconnected to why I was cooking. And I feel like people, guests, lay people who aren't professional chefs started feeling really intimidated by cooking. All of a sudden, there were all of these celebrity chefs to sort of, be intimidated by. And so I had this sort of, urge to find ways to be, to kind of foster that connectivity and sort of easiness over food again. And all that, while that was happening, I was doing a lot of little workshops here and there where, when Julie was back in the States, she would come work with me and we worked, we realized and remembered that we worked really, really well together. And we did a couple of Emily Leonard's workshops together, which are painting retreats. And we did one in France together, and then we did one in New Mexico together. And there was such a strong interest from the guests of these retreats, who were all artists, to be in the kitchen with us. And we enjoyed it. And we worked, we were finding our own rhythms, working together as bakers and cooks. And it just sort of, pieces just started kind of falling into place. So we created the model for Rêverie in like 2019. We started thinking about where we wanted to bring people to cook. We sold out the Toulouse retreat and the Loire Valley retreat in 2020. And 22. Yeah. No, well, in 2020, we sold them out. We had to cancel them. Remember? Oh, not Loire. It was just Toulouse. Yeah. It was just Toulouse. Yeah, it was just Toulouse in 2020.
It's been a blur. It's been like a weird 3 years.
We ended up selling our first round of these in 2020, selling them out, and then having to cancel, and then hoping that people would be interested whenever we resurfaced. And we resurfaced in 2022 out of the Loire Valley, sold out Toulouse and Loire Valley. Nope, just Toulouse. No, yeah, both. See, I can't remember. And now we're in the thick of 2023, and we're adding more as we go. And we can get into that later, but that's kind of how it all happened.
That sounds like a big endeavor, though. Like it seems hard enough to put together one of these in your own town, but to or even somewhere in the States, but to take it international and scope out all these places. So people go on these retreats, they're going to learn some cooking from you, but it's also this experience where you're kind of curating a travel trip, right? Where you're taking them to all these interesting places and their activities and stuff. And that's got to be a whole other challenge. Have you been to all the places previously so you have a good idea, or are you doing just intensive research?
We have, there's a lot of research that goes into it. The trip that we do in the Loire Valley is where I lived for several years. And so that one comes together very naturally. Just contacts that I have there from whenever, and then friends of friends. The other trips, Toulouse is a place we had both cooked together there back in 2018. And then I had been there a few other times just on vacation. I kind of fell in love with the region. I want to live there. And Normandy, we've also both traveled to. The Riviera, we've been to together now. It's a lot of planning and a lot of, talking to a bunch of different people to make the perfect experience come together. But I am fluent in French, which is helpful in France. We'll be expanding outside of France. And so we'll be counting on different people who are coming with us to sort of have the in and understand how things work in the new places that we're going. But yeah, I think to go back to your original question of what is Rêverie and what are we doing? Essentially, we're curating these trips. And I think one way that someone we know put it is that anybody can go to these places. Anybody can kind of hire a tour guide or look up what's best to do on TripAdvisor or whatever. But with Rêverie, we show you how to be in these places and like really soak it all in. And the way that we do that is through food, but we also just kind of like to dive into the culture wherever we are.
We're trying to build, Loire is a little easier because Julie has a life, previous life there. In Toulouse, we know this will be our second time going to Toulouse this year. As we're repeating these trips, we're building relationships with the communities there and the chefs there and the producers there and the winemakers there. And those are the kinds of things that are going to continue to like enrich these experiences. I think the French won't mind me saying they kind of are a skeptical bunch, right? Like they aren't going to jump into sort of anything very quickly, and they like to see things, at least the people we're enacting or engaging with. But like as they learn what we're about, they are welcoming us into more and more spaces. And there's like a real quality of relationship that we're trying to foster instead of just seeing what we can squeeze out of a place and hit the road, So that feels really important to how we're trying to bring people over. It feels really important to us to make sure that we're contributing to the places that we're going, not just in, tourism dollars, but also in enrichment and relationship building.
Well, as I get older, I'm more interested in having the experience, right? Like if I were to go to France, which I've never been, like I would probably go to like Paris and see the Eiffel Tower and go to the Louvre and all that bullshit, right? Like the touristy stuff, but that's not actually how I want to travel. And it seems like these are a very different kind of experience. You're not just going on TripAdvisor and saying, what are the top 20 sites to see in Paris and eat at all the hot restaurants. This is a very different type of trip. And I'm sure it appeals to a specific type of person who wants to be in that experience as opposed to just like that very touristy type thing.
Yeah, there's a big difference in my mind between being a traveler and a tourist. And I thought I was really original when I first thought of that, but I think there's actually an Anthony Bourdain quote around it.
Yeah, I think so.
But it does feel very different. I just recently went to New Orleans with my mom, and she wanted to do a bunch of things that are very tourist based. And I've been going to New Orleans for the last 25 years. And I feel like I have a very special relationship with it. And I had never once been to the things that my mom wanted to do. And so it was an interesting difference between, frankly, it felt a little miserable. My mom doesn't listen to this, but like going to Harrah's is not really how I want to travel, but like it was fun for a day. And I think that can be fun, but I travel, I try to just sort of be in the space as someone who lives there. And that feels like what a lot of people are maybe looking for these days too. They kind of want to go somewhere and I don't know, actually be in a space instead of just see the space.
Oh yeah. I just went to the UK last fall with my family, and our favorite place, we were in Wales, and, just being in this like small town and just like walking downtown and going to a random restaurant. And, we went to London, and London was our least favorite of all of our UK trip. We really loved like being in the Welsh countryside and not having this super packed agenda, just kind of like taking it all in this slow way of life and like wandering into a cafe and wandering around and just kind of like being with the people. We got to London. I'm just like, this is like a total hot mess. And we had been to London before and we wanted to show our kids all the sights, but it was our least favorite part of that trip. I was much more interested in just that kind of laid back, more lifestyle trip than the touristy thing. Do you have a typical customer? Like who are booking these trips?
It's surprisingly all over. The ages range from, I think our youngest was maybe 22 and our oldest customer is something like 80 years old, and then everything in between. So that's been really lovely to not just have one type of person coming on these trips. And there's people now from all over the US and from different backgrounds. We try to make it possible. The the trips cost a certain price. It's not going to be for everyone, but there might be people who are, for example, in the service industry and don't just have like a chunk of cash necessary in their account, but we try to work with people to set up payment plans when possible so that anyone can come on this trip who really wants to.
Yeah, I looked at the pricing and it's reasonable. I mean, it's never going to be inexpensive to travel. I mean, once you get into all the flights and lodging and stuff, when you try and cobble together your own trips, it's going to be expensive, having done this not too long ago. So it's definitely on par with, what it would take to put this together yourself. I don't think people think in all those little costs. You think about the flight and maybe like a train and the lodging, you think, oh, it costs this. But then by the time you're done with all the meals, all the day-to-day stuff you do, you're tacking on literally thousands of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is, if you come on one of our trips, everything is included for that week. Your room, all your meals, all your drinks, all of the workshops. And yeah, if you were trying to plan this on your own, I do think it would come out.
Yeah, you just got to get there. You just got to get to the airport, and then we get you from there and take care of you for the week. So.
What are some of the workshops and things that people do on these trips?
So Julie and I each do, we do have a baking focus. We'll have some guest chefs. We'll have a very heavy guest chef, very exciting heavy guest chef docket next year. And those will look a little different. There will probably be an integration of some, some different things that are more savory based, a little butchery, some, taking apart fish and that kind of stuff. We each sort of stay in our, I try to hard focus on some regional, like Normandy avails itself to really beautiful shortbreads and things like that. So we'll probably do a little bit of those things when we're in, I'm sure there will be a lot of apple tarts being made. So I try to sort of do a little deep dive into the pastries of the region. Julie does really beautiful, naturally leavened sourdough breads and teaches them how to do their own breads. And
does that mean you have to carry a starter with you?
I do carry a starter with me. I just dehydrate it so that, it's easier to transport.
And I think the best part of these, as far as cooking experiences go, is that we have an open kitchen all week. And so every evening when we're at the chateau, we have these really beautiful, family style meals that we all sit down to together, full of wine and, family style courses and dessert. That is an opportunity because I'll be in the kitchen cooking, and sometimes they'll be doing wine tastings with, sometimes they'll have other things going on their schedules. But at any point in the week, if someone's in the kitchen cooking, the guests are welcome to come in. They can bring their knife wraps. They can, they can come empty-handed. There will be tools on site. Like they can come in and, just pick herbs or learn how to make a roux or learn, whatever it is that's happening in the kitchen at any point in time. And what ends up happening later throughout the week is people start to get more comfortable, and all of a sudden we have a full kitchen full of people all cooking together, which is pretty special.
How long does it take people to kind of bond with each other? Because being around strangers, I'm sure there's like a level of comfort that has to be gained over time, depending on how you are. I mean, introverts versus extroverts and all that. But do you see people coming together pretty quickly?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like by the second day, people have already like made their new friends and they want to sit next to each other at the dinner table. And by the end of the week, everyone's just cracking jokes at each other. I feel like we should have like the awards.
We should. That would be like the superlative.
Yeah.
I mean, wine is a great social lubricant. We're inspired. We drink a lot of beautiful natural wines if we can find them from the region, which we typically can. And food is the great unifier. Typically, like people don't want to, there doesn't take much time over a, coq au vin to get to know somebody.
That's the hope. That's what we like to see in the hospitality industry. I did, I work as a private chef. I did a dinner this weekend. Hopefully they're not listening to us. It was a family dinner and a fight broke out and people actually left in the middle of dinner. We had like this awkward, 45 minutes in between courses where they were screaming in another language. And I'm just awkwardly in the kitchen, Okay, this is kind of uncomfortable. I don't know if there's going to be a physical fight and then people storming out in the middle of dinner, but usually it's a good time when people get together and eat. But families is a whole nother dynamic, right?
Family meals are very different. It's other dynamics.
Yeah.
How's working together been for you? Because, it could sometimes be challenging, especially depending on what your backgrounds and experiences are. Even friends. I've worked with friends, whether it be a short period of time or for longer. So what's that dynamic been like? And have there been any challenges? Like, how do you play to each other's strengths and weaknesses?
Well, we are friends, which is helpful. I think for me, the biggest challenge was because in the past, I've always hired Julie to be my assistant, and it wasn't difficult, but it's like learning how to let go of the responsibilities that I've taken on by myself for so long, in the kitchen primarily, because she runs this entire thing behind the scenes. I can't take any credit for the actual infrastructure of this business behind the scenes. But just as far as learning how to have someone that I can trust in the kitchen was really difficult because pastry chefs are notoriously lone wolves. So my space is very much my space. So it was just difficult for me to
And I messed up her space a couple of times and I got which rightfully so. And I also have A, less experience in a professional kitchen, and B, have been away from it for longer. And so on our first trip last year where I was coming back in and kind of relearning what that space is like, Lisa kind of had to redirect me a little bit. But I will say, as far as us working together goes, it's like a match made in heaven, which is we didn't know how it was going to go. We've been learning this as we go, and I think we're really well balanced. And it is true that I end up taking on a lot of the administrative parts of the business, but it's also one of my strong suits, and it kind of just naturally makes sense. And it's not like Lisa takes advantage of that. She's always like, what can I do? Give me more. And then I kind of have that lone wolf syndrome as well, where I'm like, nothing, I got it. Stay away from my emails. Kind of touch. Yeah. But then Lisa is a lot better at thinking of the big picture. That's not how my brain works. I just see what's in front of me. But Lisa's like, what if we did this? And let's be doing this in 5 years. And I'm like, I'm talking 5 days from now. So I think we're really well balanced in that way. And Lisa also, because of her career, has millions of connections in the food world. And that's going to be able to, push us forward as far as bringing in guest chefs. So
yeah, it's a pretty good, it's pretty sweet.
It sometimes takes a while to find your groove. I work by myself now. I did a pop-up a couple weeks ago where I collaborated with my friend Matt, who I'm sure is listening to this. And similarly, he's a personal chef and we're both used to having the kitchen to ourselves. And there was some anxiety about we're both trying to find space to plate. And it was just kind of overwhelming because both of us are used to working solo, taking the lead, having our space. And now we have to share and figure out that dynamic. And it was the first time we had ever worked together. And it's I think if we did this again, we would figure out our grooves because it's a totally different thing. If you're not used to working with people, it can really throw you off a little bit and takes you a while. But you've been doing this a little bit now, so I'm sure you found your groove.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
How many of these events are you looking to do in a year?
Big picture or just...
Yeah. I mean, ideally, what does this look like? How long does it take to plan one of these trips? And then how many do you realistically think, if you're having a good year and, everything's going the way you want, how many do you hope to be doing?
I don't know. And Julie can say if you disagree. I don't know that we necessarily have a number in mind. I think what we're trying to do is gracefully grow and maintain a brand identity that we feel really confident in and comfortable with. Neither one of us are very comfortable with big I'm not even sure, we want to be successful obviously and we want this to grow, but I think we are at this point more concerned about making sure that we keep a culture of these workshops that feels good and invite the guests that understand what we're trying to do and maintain. We're really trying to maintain this bubble of like joy and happiness and like true, like we're both so tired of just everything's hard. It's so hard.
Spoken like someone who's been in the industry for a number of years.
Yeah, and I think we're both just sort of trying to insist that there can be beauty and joy, and as long as we can maintain that in each workshop or retreat, then we'll do as many as we can.
But this also isn't like your sole business, sole form of income, correct? Because I think that's like different when like you have this thing that like you're trying to make all your money on. You do both do other things for work, right?
We definitely have to sort of supplement for now. Ideally, and as we add more retreats, for example, next year we're going to have at least six retreats, and we're also going to be opening up to private retreat opportunities. And so to answer your question about how long it takes to plan one of these, a long time. It's a lot of, starting with booking the place where we're going to be staying. You have to start that way ahead of time, and then figuring out where we're going to eat, how we're going to travel. We have to go and, vet the chateaus and the villas. We have to go check them out, make sure that they're what we need, especially the kitchens. There's a lot of little details, as you would imagine. So all that to say, it is going to eventually be a full-time job where we won't have the time to be doing other things. And if we have more retreats, then the company's, bringing in more, and hopefully that can cover our
lives. And even some employees, to help us sort of continue to grow. So
yeah, and talking about that, who are the first people that you think are important to hire? Because that's something I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs about. We start a business as a solopreneur or a partnership, and you wait a while to hire someone. So for you, what do those first people do when you hire them? Like if you had the money, let's say, and you're ready to hire someone tomorrow, who would you be hiring?
What we really need is another one of us.
A jack of all trades.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a sense, it's a tricky thing to find the person that we really need. We need our first person in mind is somebody who can come and be an assistant in the kitchen, and more than an assistant, someone who can sort of run the kitchen when we're not there and prep meals for 20 people so that we can be present with our guests. And we are hoping to find that as soon as next year. And it's a tricky thing to find because, for example, next year we'll have 3 trips in a row, but that means we're in Europe for about 6 weeks, and finding somebody who can just come to Europe for 6 weeks and then go back home and,
Ooh, I'll volunteer.
Yeah, it's not so bad. But yeah, and then we also need help with the day-to-day. So we're hoping to find someone who, similarly to us, is ready to do those trips and also kind of be working on this throughout the year.
Do you stay in contact with the people who've been on these trips? Like, are they like newfound friends?
Yeah, we have a reunion party on Saturday with the people from our first trip. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's fun. Where's the party?
It's at one of the guests' homes.
Really?
We had a bunch of wine ready, and we're all bringing food, and we're going to have a good time.
I think people are coming in from out of town.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, like I saw people on the text exchange. I think there's some people coming in from.
Well, that's fun.
Yeah.
So how do you find the local people that you want to work, like the wineries? Like, do you already have a set idea when you're picking a location who you want to use? Like, what does that vetting process look like? Because I'm sure that's really important to like find the people who kind of match with your aesthetic and mindset. Like, is that a lot of work to find the local producers, purveyors?
Yeah, Julie knows a lot about wine. It's I feel really confident in like her knowledge of wine. I like wine. I enjoy learning about wine. I don't have like a huge, I just it ends up getting poured for me a lot and I drink it. And I try to sort of retain the information, but she has like a really good working knowledge. So I think she kind of starts there.
Yeah, more than, we try to focus on natural wines more than anything because that's what we love and what we find exciting. And when I'm looking for wineries to visit or winemakers to maybe come to where we're staying to do a tasting, there's actually an app called Raisin. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I have not.
It's called like the Raisin Natural Wine app, and it's very cool for travelers who might like natural wine because there are maps on there of all of the restaurants and wine shops and wine bars that serve natural wine. So you can just look at the map and find a good place to eat and drink. And then there's also a second map that has all of the producers, at least most of them, who produce natural wine all over the world. And so that's a great place to look at to kind of get in contact with people, whether it's me looking for someone to work with, or if you're traveling and you want to go visit some wineries, then you can see where the natural wineries are and get in touch with the makers.
I don't know a lot about that, but I just had some chefs who have a cookbook coming out. They're from Montreal, and they actually have like a natural wine bar. So we talked a little more about natural wines. It's not something I've ever really explored, but I'm really interested in. I'm not really knowledgeable about wine in general at all. Like you, Lisa, I like to drink wine, and I much prefer to just talk to someone who knows what they're talking about and have them pour me something delicious. So I'm in the process of exploring more on natural wines.
It's a fun world.
It's really something. It's and the producers are, really warm and welcoming. We end up going to the Loire every single year. Well, this is our second year, but we end up hitting it right at harvest time, which is an interesting time because they're both very busy, and typically it's really impossible to make connections with them during harvest time. We still get, last year we had a woman come from, was Terre de Lou.
Terre de Lelu.
My French is also very bad.
Her name is Charlotte Jackson.
Mm-hmm. And, she's invited us to the vineyard for this year, which is really, really wonderful. So that's kind of also like another way that these relationships grow over time. But getting to know them and getting to see their vineyards and getting to see their processes is something that was really exciting, and especially for people who don't actually retain information about wine. I'm learning, now I'm actually seeing it and retaining information and retaining names and retaining a little bit more than just a working regional knowledge, which I have. But remembering vineyards is something that I've always been a little weak-brained about, but now I'm starting to really, gather information and remember who did what and how and what their processes are and how they're different, from one vineyard to another. It's really fascinating.
Well, I think the in-person kind of experiential helps with that. Like if I were to just read or be told something, and I think that's what's really cool about your retreats is that hands-on immersive experience. I think you're more apt to retain that information.
And something also that I think is really helpful is having someone, Julie's so fluent in both the language in France and also the culture of France, and knowing how to communicate with people, especially in a place as culturally rich and sort of established as France is. Knowing how to move through these spaces feels really like such a luxury to have with Julie, it really does. Like she's very good at it and she's incredibly charming. And so it's very easy to, make these relationships, even as, someone that has a lot of chef connections and food industry connections. Like I feel like I'm getting a glimpse into France that I never could have gotten without Julie.
Takes a long time with those guys.
Yeah, I don't speak French at all. I can maybe navigate a menu if you handed it to me in French. Like I love going to Montreal. Thank God they speak English there, and not even begrudgingly. They seem to genuinely be okay with me not understanding French. But yeah, I feel like I would totally be lost. And that's something I've heard is like, if you go as a tourist to France and don't know French, like you're going to have a hard time, and they don't really love that.
I think that's kind of in the past. I mean, you can still run into grumpy people, but generally if you're in a city in France and even in smaller like places outside of big cities, I feel like most people are gonna be okay with the fact that you're there, if not delighted to see you. So
I shouldn't be scared.
I wouldn't be scared. I mean, you might run into some gripey people, but
you can't take it personally. I mean, what I've noticed as someone who does not have fluent French, but is getting better and better each time with my comprehension, is that in Paris, it's better if you just speak English. In the countryside, the French people will tolerate you trying to speak French a little bit more graciously than in Paris. That's been my experience. But also I think just go and, take it for a grain of salt and
don't let it stop you from seeing the world.
No. And yeah. And there's no reason to be intimidated.
Now, are your workshops and the foods you're preparing, are they leaning more towards the classical versus the modern? Because in cooking right now, there's so many like dishes of the moment, things of the moment. But I feel like in France, this would be very much like classical techniques, traditional recipes. Am I wrong? Like,
no, we were talking with one of our chefs yesterday, and he is someone, he's going to be a guest chef next year, and he is someone that dabbles in, very modernist technique. But we were getting really excited about just talking about peasant food, and this is the way, this is the food people want to learn how to cook. People want to learn what to do with a whole chicken, from a Sunday to a Friday.
And a big part of what we offer with Rêverie, or what we want people to go home with, is recipes that they feel comfortable replicating in their own kitchen. So if we're using a Paco jet, for example, no one's going to have a Paco jet at home, right? Most people won't. So we want to show them the techniques and the recipes that they can go home and make for a dinner party and feel completely confident.
The goal is to take the intimidation factor out of cooking, and remind people that this is, one of the most basic acts that we have as human beings.
People have been cooking since the dawn of time, like just meat over fire, right? Like we don't need to overcomplicate it.
And here's how to make it taste good. And here's, and it's by and large typically about knowing what your ingredients can and shouldn't do. And those are the conversations that happen during an open kitchen session, here's why for this particular dish you want to take this fat cap off, and otherwise you would leave it on. There's room to have those conversations when everyone's drinking wine in a kitchen, cooking dinner for 20 people.
What haven't we talked about with your business? Like, what do you want everyone to know? This is your time to get it all out there.
We could talk about next year.
Oh my God.
Next year. I would love to hear about next year.
Well. We've got some exciting things planned. Let's see. Where to begin? We will next year be returning to France. So we're kind of in the midst of solidifying all of our plans for 2024. We will be going back to France to the Toulouse location as well as the Loire Valley location. Those are both for sure. And we're bringing in some guest chefs. So we will have a couple of retreats where it's just the OG pair. Maybe a little friend will join us for those, TBD. But in the Toulouse Chateau, we're going to be bringing in Erin McDowell. You can talk about her.
I mean, she's the pie goddess, she's remarkable, and she's larger than life and brilliant and beautiful and bright. And I can't wait to be in the kitchen with her. So she's going to be doing a lot. She's going to have a week in Toulouse. Yeah, she's got a bunch of French pastry techniques up her sleeve, and can't wait to kind of branch out of I think what she traditionally does in her workshops here, which tend to be very pie based. She's in the pie mind here because she does it so beautifully. So she's excited about being in France and doing a bunch of, and she's a remarkable workshop teacher. I don't know if you've ever caught any of her stuff, even just on Instagram. Her engagement is super lovely and warm. And I'm just really happy to be going to France with her for a week. It's going to be great.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
And then in the Loire Valley, there will be also a week with Lisa and I. And then for the second week that we're there, we are bringing on Tara Jensen, who is an incredible sourdough baker. And she works in wood-fired ovens. Her Instagram is Baker Hands. And she's kind of been a teacher for a lot of sourdough bakers. I know, especially during COVID, that she was putting some sort of video workshops up to help people learn how to bake.
We're going to do a lot of open fire.
Yeah, we're going to bring in some wood-fired ovens. So she'll be showing us how to kind of do that all week, keep the fire going, using it at different temperatures for different things. And I'm very excited.
I have a crazy idea that I want to do like a pit oven sort of situation, but I got to see what the property owners, how they feel.
Just dig a big hole. Can I dig a big hole in your backyard?
I can fill it back up with sand. It'll be like it never happened.
Could you do pastries in a pit? Like, would that be crazy to like try and do like classical things that are not bread baking, but like pastries in a pit like that?
Probably not, but you know, it wouldn't hurt to try.
Give it a shot.
If you're going to dig a hole in their yard, you need to try.
We'll figure out something.
There's lots of things that we can mess around with. And if you fail, you fail. Just a lesson.
Well, this sounds like a lot of fun. I hope people listening out there decide to join you on your trips.
Well, we're not done.
You're not done.
Just hold
You just...
Okay.
Okay, so we're also going to... That'll sound really good. We're going to Ireland with Trevor Moran from Locust in Nashville.
When is that going to be?
We're slow leaking the dates and stuff because we're still locking everything down. But we have our chefs, we have our locations locked down. And then the fourth chef that we have confirmed and the fourth location we have confirmed is Nina Compton will be taking us to St. Lucia.
Ooh, that sounds like a fun trip too.
Yeah.
Well, island time, you know?
Yeah. So we're branching out. So we've got the 6th plan for next year. We've got 4 remarkable guest chefs that are joining us. And that's in addition to Melissa Martin joining us in the Riviera this fall. She's officially like our first guest chef, and she's going to help us figure out how it moves best because she's really good at logistics and she's also just an amazing human and chef. Yeah, so this is the thing that we're really knee deep in right now is locking all this down for 2024. And, you know, we are going to get these spring retreats underway. We're going to Normandy and Toulouse in just under 2 months. And so we're going to kind of get those locked down. And then we're going to start, come summer and fall, we're going to be able to announce these guest chefs and start selling some tickets for 2024.
How many people can you do max on one of your trips?
It depends on where we're staying, the size of the accommodation, but in some of the bigger places, we try to max out at like 18. And I don't think we'll ever go beyond that unless it really feels like it would feel okay.
You should start leading those like high school field trips, you know, like in high schools, they go to foreign countries. I think you should like tackle that at one point once you get your footing, you know, instead of.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I think I want to take a bunch of 17-year-olds.
I've heard some horror stories. I am kind of hoping like that when my kids get into high school, I get to chaperone a trip. But I've also heard some not great stories about like you just spend your whole time trying to prevent a bunch of 17-year-olds from drinking.
Probably, yeah.
Well, any final words for our audience before we get out of here today?
We still have some tickets available for our Loire Valley trip in 2023. If anyone is just itching to get over there with us, it's going to be a very good time.
And you can find the information on reverieforever.com.
The magic of this is I can both edit and put the proper link in the show notes.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, so join us. We like cooking and we're nice people.
We're good at food.
I still use your pie dough recipe, Lisa, is like the only pie dough recipe I use. It's so hard. Like, and that's a whole nother thing. Like, I love pies. I want to make better pies. And I feel like my crust is always crap. For me, it's more like the rolling and getting it in the pan, the right shape and all that. But like, there's a million recipes and they're all different. It's like, do you chill the dough? Do you grate the dough? Do you mash it in? Do you use vodka, ice water? Like, I don't know. It's like at one point I just needed to find a recipe. So I found one of your recipes, I don't even know where, like 6 or 7 years ago. It's the only pie recipe I use. And I think it does a pretty good job for me. Just thought I'd let you know.
Just pretty good?
It does a really great job. It does a really great job. I have not wanted to find another pie dough recipe. How's that?
Ego. Thanks. It wasn't life-changing or...
Well, you know, I don't make it enough to say that it's life-changing because I just feel like it's a task. I want to get to the point where I love eating pie, but I'm always just like, am I going to tackle pie crust? Like, I know how shitty, like, pre-made frozen pie dough is. So, like, I've just got to do this. I just don't make pie enough. That's the bottom line.
I just yesterday wrote a blurb for Rose Wild's book is coming out. It's going to be beautiful, by the way. If you guys are listening, buy Rose Wild's new baking book. It's going to be really beautiful. But she does this really beautiful thing in the book where she's just talking about how to know your ingredients, because I say that a lot. Like, you just got to know what this does. And then I talk through what each ingredient is if I have the time with people. But she does a really beautiful thing of like how to like tactile, touch something, feel something, taste something. And when I was writing the blurb, what kind of came out was like, baking gets a bad rap because everyone's like, it's so rigid and scientific and there's no room. And there's actually a ton of room. You just have to have a little devotion, I think is the word, not to be like too much of a poet about baking, but like really it's about like paying attention and devotion and like practice. So yeah, the more you do your pie crust, the more you're going to like be able to just breeze it out and know exactly what's wrong or what's right with it in any given moment.
So just make pie every day.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had a friend who was on the podcast and he does sourdough baking. And he said, you know, the challenge that he sees is like people find a bread recipe, they make it, it didn't come out the way they want. And then they go to another recipe and they really should just like take that recipe and make it again. It's the repetition, like take good notes. Like, what didn't you like? Can I adjust the hydration? Do I adjust this? Like, stop bouncing around finding new recipes. Like, just find a recipe from someone you respect and you think it's going to be a good one and just keep doing that. I think for me, the baking challenge is like, you don't repeat it as much as you would if you were a savory chef. Like if I were working in a restaurant and I'm making crab cakes or steak or whatever, you're making them every single night and you can make minuscule changes. But with me, with baking, it's like I make a pie and then it's like 3 months before I make a pie again, you know?
Large for a crab cake, you know, I mean, the meat might be a little different each time, but your variables aren't really going to change. But with baking, man, like it depends on literally what the weather is that day. It depends on the water quality of where you're at. It depends on the butter. You know, butter changes from country to country.
Why does baking have to be so extra? It's just,
you know, it's what makes it so special.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show. As always, I will link everything in the show notes. People will know where to find you, how to book these trips. They'll find more about you and everything. And yeah, I loved having you on the show today.
Nice to see you again, Chris.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for having us.
And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Thanks so much and have a great day. Go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org to find our Facebook group, mailing list, and chef database. The community's free to join. You'll get gig opportunities, advice on building and growing your business, and you'll never miss an episode of our podcast. Have a great week.